Rev it up to the rad line, it's episode 61 of NES Works. I've been dreading this episode a little bit. Rad Racer and I have a difficult relationship stretching back more than 30 years. I knew this day would come though, there's no more putting it off. Rad Racer has the distinction of being the third racing game on NES to feature a low, behind-the-car viewpoint that creates an immersive sense of speed and depth. Being third to arrive may not sound like much of a distinction, but what sets Rad Racer apart from its predecessors is that it's the only one of them to be a normal auto racing game. Mach Rider was a futuristic road combat adventure loaded with conflict and road hazards. SLALOM was a downhill skiing game with an emphasis on basic stunts and sculpted asses. Rad Racer is just a plain old racing game. And that's rad? At a glance, you can see that Rad Racer falls very much into the mold of games like Outrun. In fact, I would hazard a guess that Rad Racer was directly inspired by Sega's Outrun, which had been a massive arcade hit a year prior to Rad Racer's August 1987 release in Japan, where it shipped under the name Highway Star. The similarities between the two don't begin and end with the fact that you're racing. You're specifically racing a fancy car, either a 328 twin-turbo model after a Ferrari, or an F1 racer, and you're aiming for distance along scenic routes inspired by the Americas. Compare that to Outrun, where you drive a Ferrari Testarossa Spider, aiming for distance along scenic routes inspired by Europe. It even sounds similar. Tracks like the Sunset Coastline and San Francisco themes sound a lot like up-tempo renditions of Magical Sound Shower and Passing Breeze. And the Japanese packaging for Highway Star is lined with screen captures of the car flipping over after a wreck, reminiscent of what happens here, and also after a smash-up in Outrun. What I'm saying is that Rad Racer is not very subtle about its inspirations. But hey, that's fine. The NES was all about bringing arcade experiences home. And I guess no one ever really said those experiences had to be a given publisher's own. Of course, Rad Racer is considerably less impressive from a technical standpoint than Outrun, running as it does on mere NES hardware rather than a custom board. It fares better than you might expect, though. Rad Racer may not have been able to enjoy the luxury of having been programmed for a high-capacity superscalar arcade board by Yu Suzuki the way Outrun was, but it did enjoy the luxury of having been programmed by Nasser Gabelli. Gabelli, of course, was also responsible for Square's previous NES release, the 3D Adventures of WorldRunner. Rad Racer would have been Gabelli's follow-up project once WorldRunner was complete, shipping about half a year later in Japan. And there's a pretty impressive leap in terms of technical skill and ambition here over the earlier release. 3D WorldRunner was fast-paced and looked impressive for the time, but the whole thing felt kind of flat. Rad Racer maintains 3D WorldRunner's sense of speed, but it adds an element of dimension to its racing action. The roadways drift left and right, but they also dip and rise, sending the player plunging down into valleys and over blind hills. You can see the game's technical limitations in places, like with the fact that the opposing racers mostly drive palette-swapped clones of the player's car, but it seems uncharitable to complain when Rad Racer does so much to push the NES hardware in new directions. Rad Racer is set across half a dozen different courses ranging from the Grand Canyon to the hills of San Francisco, and each course has its own distinct visual style. Dusty canyons, sunny beaches, icy plains, and even 2 after-hours city courses designed in the style of Atari's Night Driver. It looks great, and it plays pretty well. Compare Rad Racer to previous racing titles on the system, such as Nintendo's own F1 Race for Famicom, and Rad Racer comes out way ahead. The action is ultimately pretty repetitive, as you'd expect from a racing game, but the speed and intensity of the action keep it lively. Too lively, maybe. I have nothing but bad memories of Rad Racer because I borrowed it from a friend back in the day and proceeded to play it non-stop for a weekend to the point that I developed a brief, repetitive strain injury from working the D-pad. See, Rad Racer expects you not only to steer left and right while working the gas and brake, but also to press up on the D-pad in order to open up the throttle. It's pretty much impossible to win anything after the first race without liberal use of this acceleration technique, and the result is absolute murder on your left thumb. I eventually recovered from Rad Racer's abuse after a few days. For a while there, my parents were convinced that I'd have to stop playing video games forever. Truly an existentially terrifying prospect for young me. Rad Racer, the racing game so intense, it almost destroyed the career I didn't even know I would have. The need to coax that extra boost from your car makes Rad Racer a genuinely difficult game. Opening the throttle leaves your car far more susceptible to wipeouts in the event of a collision, so in order to win the races here you need to floor it while also taking care to dodge every oncoming racer perfectly. This is not a forgiving game. Rad Racer does offer one technical advantage over Outrun. It features 3D graphics. Yes, just as in 3D WorldRunner, Rad Racer allows you to switch into 3D mode with the press of a button. In the US, Rad Racer used the same technology as 3D WorldRunner to provide its 3D effect. The game shipped with a pair of cardboard glasses with red and blue lenses. The 3D mode here works by alternating the on-screen position of in-game objects with each of the 60 frames that are displayed per second, and each frame is saturated in red or blue to cause it to become invisible to the wrong eye. In Japan, however, Highway Star didn't use any such crude effects. Instead, it was, to my knowledge, the very first third-party release to make use of Nintendo's Famicom 3D system. The Famicom 3D system involved a powered headset that plugged into the Famicom's peripheral expansion port. Rather than passively creating stereo 3D separation with the use of colored lenses, the 3D system ran on active LCD-based shutter technology that covered and uncovered each eye in sync with the on-screen 3D alternation. In terms of the game itself, Rad Racer and Highway Star more or less generate 3D visuals the same way, shifting objects on screen with each frame. But thanks to the 3D system, Highway Star didn't need to colorize its visuals. The effect of using the 3D system over tinted glasses was that the on-screen image appeared dimmer, but was rendered in its actual color. Rad Racer also holds an interesting place in Square's history. Not only did Nasir Gabelli work on it, it was produced by future Final Fantasy designer Hironobu Sakaguchi, its music was created by future Final Fantasy composer Nobuo Uematsu, and future Saga mastermind Akitoshi Kawazu chipped in as well. In fact, this was Kawazu's first ever video game development project. Back in a 2012 interview, he told me that his contribution was putting together the post-game progress tracking map. Rad Racer might have been in Gabelli's wheelhouse, but it's a far cry from the work the rest of the team would become known for. Final Fantasy and Rad Racer production seemingly overlapped as the RPG shipped in Japan less than half a year after Highway Star and completely changed Square's direction as a developer and publisher. Which isn't to say that Square went all in on RPGs from that point, of course. In fact, the company produced a sequel to Rad Racer in 1990 called Rad Racer 2, but the only team member in common between the two games was Uematsu. Everyone else was up to their eyes in Final Fantasy and Saga projects by that point. Rad Racer 2 ended up shipping only in the US, which gives this series a bit of symmetry with 3D WorldRunner. That game also received a sequel called JJ, which only appeared in Japan. The more you know. Rad Racer may have been the beginning of Akitoshi Kawazu's career, but it also marks an ending here on NES Works. Specifically, it's the final NES release to ship dressed in black box format packaging. From this point on, Nintendo would gradually move away from the unified pixel art design of their NES launch window titles. In fact, we've already seen one first-party release that abandoned the black box format with The Legend of Zelda, and you can tell Nintendo is struggling a bit to figure out its branding here. Rad Racer shipped in a silver box, not black, but the only other two silver packages we've seen so far were the so-called Adventure series games, Metroid and Kid Icarus, whose silver box denoted the fact that each game offered an element of persistence through password saves. Rad Racer lacks passwords and is definitely not an adventure game, so who knows why it showed up in silver. In any case, Nintendo's packaging would retain some elements of the black box style all the way through Super Mario Bros. 2 at the end of 1988, primarily the skewed title text display, which echoed the angle at which black box titles were displayed. But soon it would abandon the style altogether, and Nintendo would just go with whatever. Although it's a bit of a shame to see the iconic black box style retire, it served its purpose, showcasing the better-than-Atari pixel graphics of the early NES games. By this point, though, the end of 1987, the NES no longer needs to prove itself, and Nintendo's literal pixel art style comes off as stodgy and dated compared to the gorgeous cover illustrations of games like Castlevania, Athena, and Mega Man? Well, close enough. Next time on NES Works, Nintendo delivers every other boxing game in the universe a body blow, right, right!